The story of Intel's founding is also the story of how Silicon Valley got its name. William Shockley, the inventor of the transistor, the most basic building block of computing, moved to Mountain View to start Shockley Semiconductor Labs in 1956. A year later, the so-called Traitorous Eight quit to start Fairchild Semiconductor, which quickly became the world's premier chip company. A decade later, two of these founding fathers of Silicon Valley, Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore, left to start their own company. They first called it NM Electronics, then quickly switched to the name Intel for Integrated Electronics. At Intel's founding in 1968, short-term memory, or RAM, didn't exist. Neither did microprocessors or CPUs, today's brains of every computer. Those are both Intel innovations.
These transistors are doing most advanced computational capabilities never thought possible, and it also enables the ecosystem all around us.
A short 3 years after raising an initial funding round of just $2.5 million, Intel went public with a market cap of $58 million. Making chips with memory capabilities was great business. So much so that well-established Japanese electronics companies like Hitachi and Fujitsu wanted in. A dozen years later, their massive factories, which had been operating 30-plus years longer than Intel's, were making memory chips far faster and more affordably than Intel could. In 1974, Intel's global market share of the memory business was nearly 83%, but by 1984, it was down to just 1.3%. So in 1985, Moore and then-President Andy Grove famously fired themselves, walked out the door, then walked back in and made a drastic pivot away from memory chips and toward microprocessors. This was just 1 year after the first Mac computer came out.
They kind of made a decision, it's a huge one, to get out of that business and to bet the company effectively on this new market. Remember, there was no PC industry, there was no personal computer industry back then.
Last year, Intel announced it's selling most of what remains of its memory business to South Korean rival SK Hynix for $9 billion. In 1971, Intel released the 4004, the world's first central processing unit, or CPU. For the first time, engineers could purchase these building blocks to use in all kinds of electronic devices. Intel processors were in the world's first personal computer in 1974, and its groundbreaking x86 architecture processors were in the first IBM personal computers by 1981. It revolutionized transistor density and speed with the first 32-bit processor in 1985. It took competitor AMD 6 years to reverse engineer a similar product. Suddenly, personal computers had to have an Intel processor to be competitive. Andy Grove took over from Moore as CEO in 1987, and Time magazine named him Man of the Year in 1997. The market for personal computers continued to grow through the first decade of the 2000s, and Intel reigned supreme in making the chips that powered them.